the incidence of lung cancer in India, the mortality rates of lung cancer, and thereon we will discuss the clinical features of small cell carcinoma of the lung. What are the subtle differences between non-small cell lung cancer? What accounts for small cell carcinoma of the lung? And thereafter the risk factors for small cell carcinoma of the lung. Then a bit about the staging process and the current staging which has recently been revised. Then what is so important in the staging for small cell carcinoma of the lung which makes it different from non-small cell carcinoma of the lung. And then the treatment according to these stages, something about the second line chemotherapies and the future therapies which are evolving in the field of small cell carcinoma of the lung, and then the concluding remarks. We know that small cell carcinoma of the lung or lung cancer by far is one of the most common cancers that is encountered worldwide, looking at both males and females, and it is also the most common cause of cancer deaths, put together various forms of cancer such as breast cancer, colon cancer and prostate cancer put together. So definitely the incidence is quite high. If you look at the various, we know that lung cancer is not one disease today, and it is actually a subtype of so many different diseases. By far adenocarcinoma of the lung is the most common cancer, which is followed by squamous cell carcinoma of the lung, and small cell carcinoma of the lung accounts for about 15% of the total cancers that we have in lung cancer. So we know that adenocarcinoma has now been subdivided into so many different forms of cancers which are driven by mutations. However, small cell carcinoma, we don't have any defining targetable mutation, and small cell carcinoma accounts for about 15% of the total cases. Again, lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death, and as I said that it accounts for more cancer deaths with colon cancer, prostate cancer and breast cancer deaths put together. The overall survival at 5 years is around 15%, taking all the stages into account, and about 40% of newly diagnosed lung cancer, perhaps it will be higher in our setting in India, that about 60 to 70% patients of lung cancer will be in stage 4. The 5-year survival rate for stage 1 is around 50%, whereas the survival in stage 1 lung cancers generally do not account for more than 15% of the total cancers that we see. This chart explains you that the mortality rate for lung cancer has been quite high. It accounts for almost 80% of the total new cancers that are detected. So even if you look at 2020, the lung cancer burden in India is likely to increase from 1.14 lakhs to 1.4 lakhs per year, whereas about 80% of these are likely to die of their disease. So whatever all said and done, we are not able to diagnose these cancers in stage 1 or in stage 2, wherein the cure rates can increase, whereas if you compare an equivalent figure of breast cancer, we are able to cure about 50% of them. So the lung cancer deaths, if diagnosed, generally the patients are likely to succumb to their illness. So the lung cancer mortality remains very high. Small cell carcinoma of the lung is a highly aggressive and undifferentiated neoplasia, and it is quite different from non-small cell lung cancer, and it is characterized by a very high proliferation rate and early metastasis, and that's the reason limited stage lung cancers, small cell lung cancer is just less than 5%. It's very sensitive to cytotoxic chemotherapy and ionizing radiations. However, it does develop very early resistance thereafter. The second line chemotherapies or third line and so forth does not really pay those dividends as is paid by the upfront chemotherapy. So the resistance mechanism in small cell carcinoma are very quick to occur, and they cause resistance so much so that the second line chemotherapies aren't very successful, and the median overall survival, despite having very good response rates, are not very impressive. It is distinguished by non-small cell lung cancer by having a rapid doubling time, and also by high growth fractions and early development of metastasis and some neuroendocrine characteristics. Clinical presentation, mostly almost all the lung cancer, small cell lung cancer patients are smokers. In fact, if you read the book, it writes that if a small cell lung cancer is diagnosed and there is no history of smoking, you should question the diagnosis. So almost 95-97% patient will have a very strong smoking history. Cough is seen in about 75%, hemoptysis in 50%, dyspnea and chest pain in 40%. Depending on where the disease lies, the symptoms may differ from patient to patient, but these are the most common symptoms as you see over here. The constitutional symptoms may be related to your paraneoplastic syndromes such as hyponatremia, which is quite often seen in these patients as a result of SIADH. So these symptoms may account for the diagnosis in 10 to 15% of the patients. Clubbing, pneumonia because of obstructive symptoms, weight loss are some other symptoms which are commonly seen in lung cancer patients. Yes, smoking, as I said, is by far the most common symptom. Other risk factors are using carotene supplements while being a heavy smoker has also been implicated. A family history of lung cancer, because then there may be some environmental factors which has resulted into a lung cancer. So family history may also be important. And these exposures can be said as asbestos, nickel, chromium, arsenic, soot, tar and radon gas. All these things may account for a small percentage of lung cancers. But as I said, that smoking accounts for almost 90 to 95% of all small cell carcinomas that we see. Residing in areas with high air pollution is also one of the risk factors, and WHO has already labeled air pollution as one of the risk factors for lung cancer. Clinical presentation we have already discussed. Small cell carcinoma of the lung may be responsible for many paraneoplastic syndromes. SIADH is one of them. We know that it is a syndrome of inappropriate secretion of ADH hormone, which may lead to hyponatremia and CNS symptoms. Ectopic ACTH production may lead to Cushing syndrome. Eaton-Lambert myasthenia syndrome is seen rarely, about in 1% of these patients. Hypercalcemia as a result of bone metastasis or as a result of PTH-RP, that is parathyroid hormone of related protein. So this may also lead to hypercalcemia, and peripheral neuropathy is another paraneoplastic syndrome which may be encountered about in 1 to 2% of these patients. Metastasis, small cell carcinoma of the lung are very widely metastasized. Brain is one of the sites of predilection for reasons unknown, but about 20% of these patients may have upfront brain metastasis. Adrenal metastasis is common, but this is also common in non-small cell lung cancer. Liver, lung and skeletal metastasis is also common in non-small cell lung cancer, and so is also common in small cell lung cancer. Generally, the detection is done by a simple X-ray, because that may show up a mass in the lungs. A CT will definitely define that mass much more clearly and also show the mediastinal lymph node metastasis. Magnetic resonance imaging is generally done to screen the brain, because as I said that about 20% of these patients may have upfront brain metastasis, which is important to know because this may also change your treatment a bit. PET is generally done whenever you have a localized disease, seemingly localized disease, and you want to be sure that it is definitely a limited small cell lung cancer and not an extensive one. In these situations, a PET CT scan has got better sensitivity to CT scan in detecting occult metastases which are not very visible on a CT scan, and hence a treatment can be chosen for a limited stage disease. So PET CT is also very important, especially if you don't have extensive disease or very obvious metastasis. Then PET CT scan has got higher sensitivity to rule out a metastasis as far as a CT scan is concerned. So these are some representative pictures. You can see that there is a central mass in the X-ray which is being corroborated by the CT scan. Mostly the small cell lung cancers are central lesions rather than peripheral lesions. Adenocarcinomas are more peripheral lesions. Squamous cell carcinomas are again more central lesions, and small cell carcinoma of the lung are again very central lesions. This is not a rule, but if you look at 10 cases, almost 8 of them would have more of a centralized lesion rather than a peripheralized lesion whenever we talk of small cell carcinoma of the lung. Diagnosis is generally established by a biopsy, although sometimes sputum cytology may be representative, but definitely you can't get away by without doing a biopsy. So these biopsies, because I said that mostly these are central lesions, they are best picked up by a bronchoscopic guided biopsy, but sometimes you may have a lesion which is big enough and can be targeted by a transthoracic biopsy. So you definitely may need a transthoracic biopsy, which may be sometimes better. If you have a pleural effusion, you can do a pleural fluid cytology and a cell block. Cell block helps you do various forms of immunohistochemistry, which can help you with coming to a diagnosis of small cell carcinoma of the lung. As I said that small cell carcinoma of the lung is labeled as a small blue round cell tumor. The other differentials of a small round blue cell tumor is lymphomas, Ewing sarcomas, that is PNET, primitive neuroectodermal tumors, and some other tumors which are more common in childhood. But in adults, small cell carcinoma of the lung is generally a small blue round cell tumor. They look like lymphocytes. They look like lymphocytes, as you can see in this particular picture of histopathology. These cells are also called as oat cells because they look like lymphocytes, and they may have a fusiform or a polygonal appearance. Sometimes you may have a large cell neuroendocrine tumor, but this is not actually labeled as a small cell carcinoma of the lung. Also, sometimes you may have a mix of non-small cell lung cancer and small cell lung cancer, and if that be the case, the patient must be treated like a small cell carcinoma of the lung, because by far it has a poorer prognosis as compared to non-small cell lung cancer. So the cancer which is more aggressive, higher grade, should be treated rather than the lower grade, relatively lower grade tumor. Staging. So stage 0 is something which is called as carcinoma in situ, so we will not bother about this. This is a precancerous lesion. Stage 1A is generally labeled as any tumor which is less than 3 centimeters and has not spread to the lymph nodes. Stage 1B is a tumor which is more than 3 centimeters but less than 5 centimeters and has not spread to the lymph nodes. Stage 2A is one which is less than 5 centimeters but has gone to the hilar lymph nodes. So this is very important. Stage 2A may also count for tumor which is larger in size but has not gone into the lymph nodes, that is 5 to 7 centimeters. Stage 2B is a tumor which is 5 to 7 centimeters and has gone to the hilar lymph nodes but not the mediastinal lymph nodes. Also, stage 2B may account for tumors which are very close to the bronchus, in less than 2 centimeters close to the bronchus, and also tumors which tend to invade the diaphragm or the chest wall. So that becomes a T3 type of lesion. So these account for stage 2B. Stage 3A is a lesion which is about less than 7 centimeters and has gone into the hilar as well as the ipsilateral mediastinal lymph nodes, that is on the same side the lung cancer lies. Whereas also tumors which are large and has gone into the main bronchus less than 2 centimeters from the carina will also be labeled as stage 3A, and those tumors who has penetrated into the chest wall or the parietal pleura, or sorry, the parietal pleura will also be labeled as stage 3A. Stage 3B tumors are the ones which has gone into the contralateral mediastinal lymph nodes, be it be stage 1, be it be T1, T2, T3. So any lymph node, even a small size tumor which has gone into the contralateral mediastinal lymph nodes or a supraclavicular lymph nodes will be labeled as stage 3B. And those tumors which are locally extensive and has gone into the mediastinum or mediastinal structures such as heart, great vessels or the vertebra, or has penetrated through the chest wall, which is very uncommon though, will also be labeled as stage 3B because they become largely unresectable. And the stage 4 lung cancer is the one which has spread outside its limits, that is in the bones, liver, lung, brain, and so forth. So there are certain differences. The 8th edition of lung cancer staging has been recently published, and these are the subtle differences between the 7th and the 8th stages and the 8th edition of lung cancer screening. As you can see over here, there is better definition of lung cancer as per the T size, that is the primary lesion size, and we are now better differentiating it between 1 centimeter to 2 centimeter, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and so forth. So likewise, the T staging is changing a bit. Also the other thing that is important over here is if you look at the earlier staging accounted for patients who had the lesion within 2 centimeters of the carina used to be upstage to T3, which will be labeled as T2 now. Also patients who had invasion of the diaphragm used to be labeled as T3 earlier, but now is up stage to T4. Those patients who had atelectasis because of a lesion lying very close to the bronchus and a complete atelectasis or pneumonia of the leftover lung used to be labeled as T3, whatever may be the size of the lesion. That means even a 2 centimeter lesion, if it is obstructing the main bronchus and has caused atelectasis, used to be labeled as T3, but now it will be labeled as T2, because such patients, the reason for this revision of the staging system is because the prognosis of such patients have been in the recent studies been better than patients when we used to stage them with the earlier staging. So this is very important. Also another very important and exciting thing which has happened in this newer staging is M1, M2, M1A, M1B and M1C. So those patients who had metastasis within the thoracic cavity, that means different nodules in the same lung, is labeled as M1A because they have better prognosis. Those who have a single extrathoracic metastasis, of course a patient who has got stage 4 disease may have 1 nodule in the liver or may have 10 nodules in the liver. The prognosis between 10 nodules in the liver or 10 metastases in the liver versus 1 metastasis in the liver will be definitely very different, but all are stage 4. So to differentiate that, the newer staging system takes into account that if there is a singular extrathoracic metastasis, it may be different than those who have multiple extrathoracic metastasis. So these are certain differences between the 7th and the 8th edition of lung staging. I think this is again just to highlight the same thing, how the stages are well defined now. We have stage 1A which is further divided into A1, A2 and A3. We have 1B, 2A, 2B, and now we have a stage 3A, B and C also to take into account to better differentiate the prognosis of these patients and to make treatment decisions. However, as far as small cell carcinoma of the lung is concerned, the staging although is the same as non-small cell carcinoma of the lung, but for practical purposes, the staging of small cell carcinoma of the lung has been really made very simple. So it is basically very limited stage and extensive stage, as simple as that. So you don't have to really bother about remembering the entire staging process as is true for non-small cell lung cancer. It's very simply put, very limited stage and extensive stage. If you have a very limited stage, it is generally T1, T2, N0 and maximum N1, and these patients can be offered surgery or concurrent chemoradiotherapy with a 5-year overall survival of around 50%. Limited stage is one which doesn't have any extra thoracic spread, but they are stage 2, stage 3, stage 2 and stage 3, and generally these are treated with radiation and chemotherapy concurrently. The definition of limited stage disease is one which means that the entire disease in the thorax can be taken into one radiation portal. That means the radiation beam or the radiation portal encompasses the entire volume of the disease in the lung. If somebody has a very extensive lung disease, perhaps they will not be labeled as limited stage disease, although it is still in the thorax, because they cannot be taken into one radiation portal. So if any disease which can be taken in one radiation portal will be staged as limited stage disease, and the extensive stage disease is of course those who have multiple lung nodules or have liver metastasis, bone or brain metastasis and so on and so forth. So this is exactly what I was trying to explain you. You can see that the picture on your left side or on your left side shows a limited stage disease which is marked by green and can be taken into one radiation portal and can be given radiation therapy, whereas in the extensive stage disease you have various metastases elsewhere, so radiation is not a part of the therapy. As I said that limited stage disease accounts for 1 out of 3 patients, 2 out of 3 patients are generally extensive stage disease. and the spread is generally within the lung and the adjoining or the draining lymph nodes, and is confined to the area and can be treated with chemoradiation, whereas extensive stage disease has to be treated with chemotherapy followed by prophylactic cranial irradiation. As said, that very limited stage disease are the ones which have T1 or T2 lesions and generally are node negative. Such patients, although account for less than 5% of the total patients, they can be offered surgery in small cell lung cancer, and this will be followed by adjuvant chemotherapy, which is definitely a must. They should not be left alone after surgery, and as is written over here. And generally, before embarking upon surgery, a mediastinal staging process is very important. So what may seemingly look normal on a CT scan or a PET CT scan, the lymph nodes may have some microscopic disease. So one must do a mediastinoscopic or a EBUS guided FNAC of multiple lymph nodes to be 100% sure that there is no metastasis in these lymph nodes, and then the patient can be labeled as very limited stage disease and offered surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy, as is written over here. In the limited stage disease, generally the patients have good performance status, they are on their own, they have limited symptoms. These patients are treated with radiation along with chemotherapy. So it's not radiation followed by chemotherapy, it's chemoradiotherapy, that is chemotherapy and radiotherapy put together, and the regimen which is used is cisplatin etoposide, as one would use it for extensive stage disease. And with this type of a treatment, the overall survival, the median overall survival is about 17 months, and the 5-year survival would be around 20%. For extensive stage disease, chemotherapy remains the cornerstone of the treatment. As I said earlier, that the response rates are very impressive, about 60 to 75%, and it achieves a complete response also in about 10% of these patients. However, the resistance develops fast, and these patients then they relapse, leaving them with very limited options of further treatment, and the 5-year survival rate is less than 2% and or is practically zero. The 2-year survival rate is less than 5%, and the median overall survival is about a year. Generally, these patients are treated with cisplatin and etoposide, which remains the cornerstone of the therapy, and we go up to 6 cycles of chemotherapy followed by a break, and then we leave the patients alone. And generally those patients who have poorer performance status because of the disease, such patients in non-small cell lung cancer are generally not treated, whereas in small cell lung cancer they may still be offered treatment because the response rates to chemotherapy is remarkable. It's like 75 to 80% patients are going to respond, and their performance status may actually drastically improve, provided the performance status is not hampered because of comorbidities, but because of the disease per se. As I said, that these are the various options of treatment. Cisplatin, carboplatin are basically alkylators, very strong alkylators. They form DNA adducts, because of which during the replication process the DNA breaks, and this becomes a terminal event for the cancer cell. Etoposide is a topoisomerase inhibitor. It basically blocks the DNA replicating fork and causes the DNA to get ruptured and halts the DNA synthesis and leads to programmed cell death. Topotecan is another topoisomerase inhibitor, and it again acts very similar to etoposide. It forms, it gets into the DNA replicating fork and causes the DNA to rupture. The first line chemotherapy, it has been since 1970s, various forms of chemotherapy has been studied. The CAV regimen, that is cyclophosphamide, adriamycin and vincristine, were the first regimens to be studied in this particular disease, and as you can see, the median overall survival has been around 8 to 9 months. However, then came the major study, the Sundstrom study, which compared CAV with EP, and as you can see that there was a randomization of around 436 patients to EP versus cyclophosphamide, epirubicin and vincristine, and these were continued for about 6 cycles, and the results were such that EP actually scored above CEV. So in terms of 2 years and 5 year survival, the EP regimen was slightly better off than CAV regimen or CEV regimen, and the median survival time was also slightly in favor of EP 14.5 months versus 9.7 months, and there was no significant difference in survival for the extensive stage disease, but for the limited stage disease, EP was better. Also, the toxicity profile was in favor of EP, and that is how EP became the standard of care rather than CEV. There has always been a question in science about using carboplatin versus cisplatin, but as far as small cell carcinoma of the lung is concerned, there is a meta-analysis which has compared carboplatin and cisplatin. Cisplatin is more nephrotoxic. Cisplatin has got more neurotoxicity. Cisplatin causes more nausea and vomiting as compared to carboplatin, whereas carboplatin causes more hematological toxicity. Carboplatin is much more easier to handle and much more easier to give. With cisplatin, you have to give a lot of fluids, so a cardiac patient may not be able to take it. So this controversy of using carboplatin versus cisplatin was put to rest by this particular meta-analysis, which showed that the overall response rates, the progression-free survival, the overall survivals, everything was very similar to carboplatin and cisplatin, or the cisplatin was very similar to carboplatin. So carboplatin being an easier molecule to handle, I think carboplatin has become the treatment of choice in most of the patients. Other chemotherapeutic options, irinotecan is another drug which has been used to treat small cell carcinoma of the lung, and this was a Japanese study which compared EP, the cisplatin and etoposide, head to head with cisplatin and irinotecan. They showed that irinotecan is plus cisplatin is superior to EP. However, in another study which was done by Hanna et al. In America, this showed that the two regimens are by far the same. There is no difference between the two regimens as far as response rates are concerned, the median progression-free survival, or the overall survival is concerned. So the Japanese data is an outlier data, whereas the European, the American data says that both regimens are as good. The toxicity between the two regimens are different. We know that irinotecan causes more diarrhea, whereas EP causes more thrombocytopenia and other problems like that. So I don't think there is anything major to choose between the two regimens. It is absolutely fine to use an irinotecan plus platinum regimen upfront, but EP remains by far the most common regimen used for this particular disease. Another very large study, because of this exciting data coming from Japan, they did another study in America called as the SWOG 0124 study, which again tested the IP regimen as used in Japan versus the EP regimen, and again there was no difference between the two regimens. If you look at the response rates, they are very similar. If you look at the median progression-free survival is again very similar, median overall survival is again very similar. So the Japanese data was not reproduced in America in these two large studies. One is by Nasir Hanna and the other is the SWOG 0124 study. So, these two studies are very, very similar. Another randomized phase 3 trial of irinotecan and carboplatin versus carboplatin and etoposide, now using instead of cisplatin the carboplatin regimen, and again you may see that that overall survival was slightly inferior with EC in this particular subset of patients also, whereas the median overall survival with IC was slightly better off. But these are very subtle differences. The NCCN guidelines today, as we practice, labels both EC, that is etoposide and cisplatin, and irinotecan and cisplatin as competing standards of care. So there is nothing much to choose between them. As said, the toxicity was slightly different because irinotecan is a different drug. There is more diarrhea with irinotecan, whereas there is more hematological toxicity with etoposide. So coming back to radiotherapy in limited stage disease, there are a lot of studies, numerous studies have been published, but what I will discuss is about the meta-analysis of using radiotherapy in limited stage disease along with chemotherapy. So this is coming from Pignon. Pignon is a very famous scientist who has been responsible for publishing a lot of meta-analysis in lung cancer as well as head and neck cancers. So 13 trials, 2000 odd patients with limited stage disease, and it has discussed that whenever we combine chemotherapy and radiotherapy together, not in sequence but together, there is actually a survival benefit of about 5% in overall survivals, and also the relative risk of death is decreased by about 14%, and with a hazard ratio of 0.86. There was also a trend towards larger reduction in mortality among younger patients. because younger patients tend to withstand this chemotherapy even better, and the hazard ratio in this particular population was 0.75, that is about 25% reduction in the risk of death. So chemoradiotherapy given together, that is concurrent chemoradiotherapy is the rule for treating limited stage disease. The response rates, as I said, even in limited stage disease is about 70 to 90%. In extensive stage disease it's around 70%. The median overall survival in limited stage disease is around 18 months, whereas in extensive stage disease it is about a year. So does thoracic irradiation improve survival and local control even in patients in limited stage small cell carcinoma of the lung? Yes, there are a lot of published data, and the overall survival benefit is in absolute terms is about 5% when you use concurrent chemoradiotherapy, as is written over here. And also it may account for slightly extra toxicity. Sometimes doctors, they don't treat patients with concurrent chemoradiotherapy with the fear of toxicity and toxic deaths, but as far as the literature is concerned, the toxic deaths, because combining the two modalities definitely increase the toxicity, but the toxic deaths is not more than 1 to 2%. Then again, there has been some studies about adding a third agent and bringing in better response rates and better survival. So we have studies of addition of ifosfamide to etoposide and cisplatin, which definitely brings up the progression-free survival and overall survival and also the response rates, but at the cost of much increased toxicity. You will not have a lot of subset of patients who can tolerate a triplet regimen over and above the EP, which is the standard of care. Another regimen which includes cyclophosphamide and anthracyclines also along with EP shows better response rates, better progression-free survival, small improvement in overall survival, but with lot of toxicities. So these are not suggested standard of cares, because for small improvements we can't expose a lot of patients to increased toxicity. The safety becomes a concern whenever you are using more chemotherapeutic agents upfront, and I said that the role of these agents or multi-agent chemotherapy with more than 2 agents is not a standard of care. Coming to newer agents and other agents, as you can see that there are different other agents which are also effective in small cell carcinoma of the lung, like paclitaxel, docetaxel, gemcitabine, topotecan, amrubicin, and if you can see that the response rates to most of these agents have been in the tune of 30 to 40%, and the median overall survival generally ranges in 9 to 12 months. So there is no further improvement over what we have seen with EP. So these agents are generally left to be used in the second line or the third line, and so forth. I said that these are the various combinations which can be tried along with platinum as the backbone of the therapy, and as seen the response rates is generally to the tune of 70 to 80%, whatever regimen you may pick and choose among these, and the 1 year survival is around 10 months to 1 year. There has been data that since many patients, about 20% patient may hit a complete remission, but may have about some residual disease left in the lung. Lung being the starting point of the entire disease. In extensive stage disease, when you treat with palliative chemotherapy, lung being the primary site of the disease may have some residual tumor. So this study was done, which is a phase 3 study of incorporating radiotherapy to the local site even in an extensive stage disease for a patient who has liver and other metastases, and they showed that if you do thoracic radiation even in an extensive stage disease, you may have some survival benefit to the tune of about 16% decrease in the risk of death in these particular patients. The progression was less likely to be there in thoracic radiotherapy group. So even in an extensive stage disease, you may actually decrease the chance of death. So this is a new chapter in oncology. This was very recently published in Lancet Oncology in 2015. So we are offering some of these patients who have residual disease in the lung in an extensive stage disease, we are offering them thoracic radiotherapy. Prophylactic cranial irradiation, as I said that almost 20% of these patients will have upfront metastasis, and if they are treated well, those patients who do not have metastasis, about 40 to 50% will develop brain metastasis during the next 6 months of their treatment. So brain metastasis is very common. We know that chemotherapy does not penetrate the blood-brain barrier, so brain becomes a sanctuary site. So about 45% of these patients are likely to develop brain metastasis. Since the incidence of brain metastasis is so high, prophylactically treating the brain becomes very important. And this is a standard of care, and this is as per the EORTC study, which was an NEJM publication in 2007. We showed that those patients who receive prophylactic cranial irradiation has a survival benefit to the tune of almost 5%, and also the hazard of developing a brain metastasis or a symptomatic brain metastasis decreased by almost 75%. So the cumulative risk of brain metastasis decreased from 14% to 40%. So prophylactic cranial irradiation is very important, and as you can see that the 1-year survival rate for those patients who received prophylactic cranial irradiation actually increased by from 13% to 27%. So this is very important. Prophylactic cranial irradiation is an important adjunct in the entire treatment of patient who land up with either limited stage disease or an extensive stage disease. Generally, people argue that prophylactic cranial irradiation may decrease the quality of life, but as you can see over here, the quality of life is not hampered by giving prophylactic cranial irradiation. So this is, it summarizes the entire treatment. This slide summarizes the entire treatment of small cell carcinoma of the lung. One needs to differentiate limited stage disease from extensive stage disease, and within the limited stage disease, very limited stage disease like T1, T2 and 0, which can be offered surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy, whereas those who have limited stage disease, they should be treated with concomitant chemotherapy and thoracic radiotherapy. If at all it is possible, if the patient has got a good performance status. For those who have extensive stage disease, they should receive chemotherapy. If there is a good response, they should receive prophylactic cranial irradiation. That is the bottom line. Those who have extrathoracic complete response, that is their extrathoracic disease has vanished away but have residual thoracic disease, they can be offered thoracic radiotherapy also. Now coming to second line chemotherapy, the results in first line was around 70 to 80%, whereas the results in second line drops down to 20%. So the median overall survival of these patients who relapse, as such almost all and every patient is going to relapse, especially in especially in extensive stage small cell carcinoma of the lung. So they have a median overall survival of just 4 to 5 months. And as such, the interval between the end of their first line chemotherapy and the start of second line chemotherapy is the most important prognostic factor, which is going to decide how they are going to fare in their second line therapy. Most of these patients will recur within 3 months. So those who recur within 3 months are the ones who have a poorer prognosis, where those who recur after 6 months have a better prognosis, and one can use the same initial regimen for those who relapse after 6 months, whereas those who relapse within 3 months, you have to use a second line agent. Topotecan is by far the most studied agent in this particular subset. So topotecan was compared to CAV chemotherapy in this particular study, and as you can see that the median overall survival was slightly in favor of topotecan. However, there was nothing much to choose between the two regimens. The neutropenia was slightly lesser with topotecan as compared to CAV chemotherapy, and non-hematological toxicity was grade 1 or grade 2 in both the regimens. Oral topotecan was also used against best supportive care for a patient who is considered unfit for chemotherapy. They compared topotecan to best supportive care, and they showed that topotecan is better than best supportive care alone, both in terms of survival, overall response rates, and also maintenance of their quality of life. So generally it is thought that chemotherapy is going to decrease the quality of life, whereas in this particular study against best supportive care, that means you are not treating these patients on any chemotherapy, but you are only supporting them by giving painkillers and etc. Topotecan was better in terms of survival, maintenance of quality of life, as also response rates and overall survival. So the response rates with topotecan was around 7%, with 44% patients achieving a stable disease, and it scored above no treatment. Best supportive care, the infection rates were slightly higher with topotecan, but these were well managed with antibiotics and other things. And overall, the toxic deaths in topotecan arm were about 6%, whereas all-cause mortality was higher in the best supportive therapy, whereas it was lesser in topotecan arm. Coming to other possible second-line agents, paclitaxel is another agent which is frequently used in these particular patients. Amrubicin, which is a type of doxorubicin or anthracycline which has been used. These are the various agents which can be used against, and these are the various studies. And if you look at topotecan CAV, the topotecan best supportive care, topotecan and amrubicin, all of these studies indicate that the median overall survival is to the tune of about 6 to 7 months, and these are very modestly improved by chemotherapy. Some newer drugs such as obatoclax, picoplatin, temozolomide are some new drugs which are being explored in this particular area. Coming to future treatment strategies, this is something which is very latest. Immunotherapy has been a very great success as far as non-small cell lung cancer is concerned. Whereas in small cell carcinoma of the lung, we had some presentations in ASCO meeting, that is American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting 2016, which showed that when you combine two various forms of immunotherapy, you may actually get some very impressive response rates as far as small cell carcinoma of the lung is concerned. Although this is not a part of the discussion today, but very simply put, the T cells of the patient is actually capable of treating the cancer or having an immune response against cancer. But the cancer has an escape mechanism of evading the immune system, and it does that by expressing PD-L1. If you look at the interaction between T cell and tumor cell, you find that PD-L1 is a negative downstream signaling pathway, or a negative negative interaction, and that is how the tumor cell escapes the immune system. And similarly, at the level of dendritic cell, that is the antigen presenting cell, and the T cell, there is again a negative feedback loop which is working, which can again be targeted by ipilimumab, that is CTLA4 inhibition. So bringing the two inhibitions into picture, this was the study which was the Checkmate 451 study, which collected data of patients who were treated with nivolumab and ipilimumab brought together. And we find that these patients, as you can see, these are called as the waterfall plots, the plots that are on the bottom, and the above plots are called as the spider plots. The spider plots, so each arrow or each line stands for a singular patient, and each bar stands for a singular patient. So those which are decreasing from the unity line, that is the line at 0, are the ones who have a decrease in their disease load. Whereas in the spider plot, each line stands for a singular patient, and that is becoming lesser over time. It represents those patients whose disease could decrease as a result of immunotherapy, and there were certain patients in whom the disease increased. So the waterfall plots are indicative that if you combine nivolumab and ipilimumab, you get a better tumor reduction and overall response rates as compared to when you use nivolumab alone. So a combined immunotherapy approach may be actually better. The progression-free survival is about 3 months, and the overall median duration of response is about 6.9 months, and the median overall survival is around 7 months. So these are certain upcoming things as far as immunotherapy is concerned. There is yet another agent called as rovelpituzumab tessarin. Rovelpituzumab is a delta-like protein 3 inhibitor. It's an antibody drug conjugate. That means it's an antibody which goes and binds to the area of concern or the area where it needs to target, and there is a drug which is attached to this antibody, which gets internalized into the cancer cell and does the trick or causes cytotoxicity. So we know that in small cell carcinoma of the lung, it is the P53 and the RB pathway, that is retinoblastoma, and the P53 pathway which is hampered, because of which the cancer stem cells starts generating, and as a result of upregulation of ASCL and downregulation of Notch signaling, which acts through the DLL3 pathway, that is delta-like protein 3 pathway. It causes tumorogenesis and it causes mature neuroendocrine tumor cells to be formed in the body. And this can be targeted by this particular drug called as rovalpituzumab tesirine, which is an antibody against the delta-like protein 3. So this efficacy was tested in a study, and you can see in this waterfall plot that for each patient there is almost there is a good reduction in the disease. For a significant, almost 50% of the patient had their disease becoming lesser as a result of this particular drug, which is definitely quite impressive. If you look at the overall response rates, it's around 29%. I told you that with topotecan in second line, the response rates is just 7%. So 29% is definitely a big improvement as far as what was achievable with cytotoxic chemotherapy. Look at the clinical benefit rate. It is seen in about 86% and almost 92% when you use it in third line. The response rates are quite impressive. So I think this drug has got a lot of promise once we develop this drug further. And the median overall survival is around 5.8 months and the 1 year survival is about 32%, and we are talking of patients who have failed first line and second line therapy also. So I think the overall comparison with cytotoxic chemotherapy is much better. So as I have already explained, and the adverse effect profile is also quite favorable. The only toxicity that is seen is fatigue, which is seen most commonly, whereas pleural effusion, peripheral edema, nausea, hypoalbuminemia are not that common, and as such the grade 3 toxicities are very less. Some patients do encounter thrombocytopenia, that is decrease in the platelet counts. So this is one agent which has got single agent activity and can be a good replacement of chemotherapy, and as such, since the toxicity is less, it's a targeted therapy, it may be offered in some patients. As I said, that the prognosis of small cell carcinoma of the lung has not changed in the past decade quite drastically, and the response rate in limited stage disease is about 90% with a median overall survival of around 14 to 20 months, whereas in extensive stage disease the median overall survival is about 10 months, and the response rates is around 70%. These are the NCCN guidelines of 2017 version 3. You can see that the guidelines are being revised within 2017. We are sitting in May, that is 5th month, and we have got 3 revisions within 2017 of the guidelines that we practice for treating small cell carcinoma of the lung. These are the various initial workup which is required: pathology review, electrolytes, brain MRI, PET CT scan, especially in limited stage disease. I think we have already discussed this, and then you need to define between limited stage and extensive stage disease. As far as very limited stage disease, you can offer surgery as per the guidelines and then followed by systemic therapy. For those patients who have limited stage disease more than what can be surgically treated, the treatment of choice is systemic chemotherapy and radiotherapy, as is written over here. And those patients who have a poor performance status, you need to individualize the therapy in them. Perhaps you can use these therapies in sequence rather than concurrently. Extensive stage disease, you need to differentiate whether these patients have any other issues such as SVC syndrome. I told you that these patients have mainly central lesions and sometimes they may present with SVC syndrome. In that case, you may have to give radiotherapy to the chest wall first or to the mediastinum and then treat with systemic chemotherapy. Some patient may have brain metastasis up front. If they are not symptomatic, you may treat with chemotherapy up front and then give radiation therapy to the brain. If they are symptomatic, you may have to start with radiation therapy first and then treat with systemic chemotherapy. This is in the follow-up, as most of these patients are likely to relapse. This is about the initial therapy and the response to therapy. For those patients who have stable disease, those who have complete response or a partial response, be it limited stage or extensive stage, you need to give them prophylactic radiation. In extensive stage disease, you may also offer thoracic radiotherapy. As we had discussed, there was a latest study which gave radiotherapy even in extensive stage to the thorax. Those who have stable disease can be just followed up. For those who have primary progressive disease, generally there is not much to offer. They may be offered some second line chemotherapies. And Those patients who relapse, they can be offered second line chemotherapies as is written over here, depending on their performance status and how they are faring. And these are the various chemotherapy schedules. As I said, the cisplatin etoposide is by far the most common regimen used for limited stage as well as extensive stage regimen. But yes, irinotecan can be, etoposide may be replaced by irinotecan, which is one of the standards of care based on the SWOG study and the Japanese study. For those who have relapsed within less than 6 months, topotecan, irinotecan, which has not been used previously, paclitaxel, temozolomide, nivolumab plus ipilimumab, the immunotherapy has been approved by the guidelines. Vinorelbine, gemcitabine can also be used, CAV can be used. For those who relapse after 6 months, they can be treated with their original regimen, because we don't expect the response to last more than 6 months. That means they have had a good response to their first line. So the first line can be reused in these patients. For those patients who present with other constitutional symptoms such as SIADH, they need to be tackled accordingly. They can be offered vasopressin receptor inhibition such as tolvaptan. They can be started with antineoplastic therapy. Then only the improvement is likely to occur, and fluid restriction and salt replacement. Cushing syndrome, again ketoconazole can be used, but starting antineoplastic therapy is likely to cure their Cushing syndrome as well. Leptomeningeal metastasis needs radiation therapy. Pain management, nausea needs to be tackled accordingly with antiemetics and pain management, and psychological distress can be tackled with due psychological counseling. So to summarize, most small cell lung cancers have extensive stage disease, almost more than 90% or maybe 80%. Initial responses are high, but the disease rapidly develops resistance and then metastasizes. 50 to 70% of these patients with extensive stage small cell carcinoma of the lung are treated with first line platinum and etoposide combination. Irinotecan is something which can be used along with platinums. Outcomes with second line treatments are poor. There are some newer therapies which are being tested, such as antibody drug conjugates and immunotherapies, which has shown some light of hope in these particular patients, but we need to develop them even further to bring in better results. With that, I'll thank you for your attention.